Hello, in this lecture we're going to continue our discussion of market failure versus government failure, Chapter 8. Remember that the goals are to explain what an externality is and show how it affects the market outcome. Describe 3 methods of dealing with externalities, define public good, and explain the problem with determining the value of public good to society. Explain how informational and moral hazard problems can lead to market failure, and explain why market failure is not necessarily a reason for government intervention. So last time we talked about negative externalities. Now we're going to move on to positive externalities. And remember, what an externality is basically when there's a negotiation between A and B, as there would be in a free market. A and B are going to be better off because they're looking out for their self-interest and they have all the information in a classical model, and therefore they're going to make decisions that make them both better off, which really makes everybody better off. However, in an externality, a third person is affected. Last time we talked about when someone was affected negatively. So if there was like an airport put in place, the property value of the people that are around it are negatively affected. Now we're going to talk about someone that is affected positively. If A and B did a negotiation and C is affected positively, their life is better. And you might think, well, there's not a problem with that. Why is there a problem if somebody is positively affected between a negotiation between A and B? And there is kind of a problem with that, because the problem is that because those benefits aren't involved in the negotiation, we're not getting as much of this outcome as we would if we can get somehow their benefit into the negotiation. So we're not getting, the society is not getting what they could if all the positive benefits were put in place. So the marginal social benefit includes the marginal private benefit of consumption plus the benefit of the positive externalities resulting from consuming that good. It includes all marginal benefits that society receives. So we have the same idea here. We've got, if there are no externalities, we've got the supply and demand, the marginal private cost, the marginal private benefit, and we have our equilibrium, of course. That's kind of like if we're talking about between A and B, and Party C. Party C comes into play here, and now we can see that the marginal social benefit has shifted out here. So we have, of course, D0 and D1, and we have this difference, and we have a new equilibrium point here. So when there's a positive externality, the marginal social benefit will be above the marginal private benefit, and the market price will be too low to maximize the social welfare. So in this case, what happened is the quantity, we're not producing enough of it, which of course is the opposite of the negative externality, and that's going to be our issue. The society would benefit if we produced more of it, but if we take a look at the benefits between A and B in the negotiation, and we cannot somehow put in the benefit of the others within that negotiation, then we have a problem. In our example before, it was like the lighthouse. If we had the lighthouse, someone made a lighthouse for themselves, then maybe they're not going to make the lighthouse big enough because they only want their own benefit. Maybe it's not going to spin around like it would, and it won't help all the other boats that are coming in, and that type of thing. If they were to take into consideration the other people and somehow put that into the outlook, then the lighthouse might be bigger and better. And the same idea with roads and things like this. If we were to make our own roads, they would be beneficial to us, but of course other people can use the roads and whatnot, and that benefit that other people would have in the use of them would not be in the cost of the person producing them, and that could be an issue. The same idea is involved in education, which is why education is the argument for education to be subsidized, would be that the people being educated are producing and giving back to society greater than the amount that they're being cost in there, and that would be the justification for the subsidization of education. So alternative methods for dealing with externalities. So we got the negative and the positive externalities. They both have problems, and so how can we deal with them? We can recognize them. We see that theoretically those can exist. We recognize that problem. What do we do about it? So we could have direct regulation, is when the government directly limits the amount of a good people are allowed to use. We could just come in and directly regulate something. The incentive policies, tax incentives, for example, are programs using a tax to create incentives for individuals to structure their activities in a way that is consistent with the desired ends. We can manipulate the tax system basically to affect people's behavior. So things like roads, we can of course tax things like toll roads, or we can have tax on gasoline and whatnot, which would then put the costs in some way into the consumption of the roads in that case. Market incentives are plans requiring market participants to certify that they have reduced total consumption by a certain amount. So market incentives would mean that we would have to see some kind of reporting on the reduction of something such as pollution or something like that. And so let's take a look at those voluntary, and then there could be voluntary reductions. In that case, the government could take the role in basically saying, hey, people, there's a problem here, and we advise this to happen because of these externalities, and basically ask for participation in some way. And we'll take a look at these policies. So tax incentive policies. A tax on pollution, for example, that equals the social cost of a negative externality will cause individuals to reduce the quantity of the pollution, causing activity to the social optimal level. So basically, this is the idea that we have a negative externality, in this case being pollution. So the idea being the negotiation between A and B, that they're doing business here, not taking into account the pollution, whatever that pollution may be. Maybe they're putting something into the river or something, or they're heating water and trying to cool it, and that cost is not involved or is not in the bottom line. Therefore, the company may have no incentive, therefore, to reduce that, even though it is a cost. It's a cost to society, but it's not in the bottom line. Unlike other things, even pollution-related things such as using too much power or things like that, the market actually regulates that very well because of competition. That's in the bottom line. They want to reduce that. They're going to reduce the number of power used. Why? Because they pay for it. So they're trying to reduce that. However, if it's something like, air pollution or something like that, that's not in the bottom line, the cost is real, but it's not in there. How do we account for that? How can we get it into the bottom line? Note what we're trying to do here is we're not in this policy really taking away the market. We haven't said, okay, the government's going to completely take over. That causes its own problems in that the government's not exactly efficient all the time because they don't have market incentives. We're trying to keep the market in there and say, okay, here's the difference in terms of the tax difference. And if we could then put in a tax, then we can account for that difference and move our new equilibrium to this point and reduce the amount of quantity still using market forces. There are, of course, some problems with this, and a couple problems that you might see here. One is that we don't know exactly what that point is because the market usually tells us what the equilibrium is. We can think theoretically and say, well, we know that there are marginal costs that are not being accounted for, but how do we put a dollar amount on that in terms of taxes? Not exactly the easiest thing to do. Also, if we tax one company and not another, we could be having a problem, and we need to really put something like this universally in order to have it have its best effect. So if we have countries are different countries that produce things and compete with each other, and we have one country with a policy such as this and another that doesn't, then we could have a comparative advantage to the one that doesn't. Those are some problems. But you can see the theory in this is good in that we are trying to use market solutions in order to fix the problems, not just throw the market out, of course. Market incentive policies. A market incentive plan is similar to the direct regulation in that the amount of good consumed is reduced. So we could try to have a market incentive to reduce the item. The market incentive plan differs from the direct regulation because individuals who reduce consumption by more than the required amount receive marketable certificates that can then be sold to others. So this is the idea, of course, that if we set a level of basically pollution, for example, and we say that if you go below this level, then you've done better than your job. And notice if we just set the level, if we just say, here's the level, you have to hit that, then everybody's going to, of course, hit the level. But what do we want to do? We want to have market incentives. We want people to be incentivized to do better than the bar. And how do we incentivize people to do better than the bar? We say, hey, if you do better than the bar, you can sell that added resource, and somehow we're going to put a cost on that. We're trying to put that cost into the cost of production. And if you do better, then you can sell that to someone who's not as efficient. And in that way, we're using actually more market forces in that way. So there's actually a lot of people would argue that is even more benefit because of the use of markets to incentivize people to do even better than just the bar set by the government. However, we still have kind of that problem where to make that work, we'd have to make it universal a lot of times, and that means not just within the country. It would usually be for large productions like pollution. Maybe we'd like to have it universal for everybody, and that's a barrier. But Voluntary reductions is another option. Voluntary reductions allow individuals to choose whether to follow what is socially optimal or what is privately optimal. So we could, as the government, we could go in and say, hey, there is this problem, there's this externality problem. We want you to be aware of it, and we advise to do things that are more socially optimal. For example, in California, oftentimes there's going to be droughts, and the government will tell us, hey, there's a drought, it would be optimal for everybody to conserve water as much as possible. Now, most people are willing to do that. Everybody wants to help out and chip in. However, when it becomes apparent, or when people start to feel that they're chipping in more than everybody else, or everybody else is not chipping in and they are, then you could start to feel like your contribution is a drop in the bucket in this case, and it's not going to be effective. Therefore, why should you do it? And that is a problem with the voluntary reductions, kind of like a free rider problem. So the socially conscious will often become discouraged and quit contributing when they believe a large number of people are free riding. So free rider problem is an individual unwilling to share the cost of the public good. And notice this is a natural thing to think. If we think about it, we start saying, well, our consumption is really small and compared to the entire pool of consumption, and therefore it doesn't really matter what we individually do. You can see that that's going to happen a lot of times when we have these type of problems. And you see it in a lot of different areas. There's the same argument in healthcare. There's the same argument in a lot of different types of areas. And the question is, how can we deal with the free rider problem?